Alright, and from here on in, basically what we're going to do is, real quick, I'm going to go ahead and zoom to layer on my 20-mile buffer just so I can see my study area. From this point, I'm just going to go ahead and finish up my map in a layout view. But before I ever go to layout view, I'm going to take a look at my layers. I'm going to say, well, those all look pretty good. And I've got some other layers that I'm not going to use, and so this is a good time to always go ahead and just remove layers. Remember, you could always go back and add them add these back in later. And just go ahead and remove those out of here. I can always bring those back in. One way to do this is that you can always just do a save as at this point in time, and so what I'm going to do is just call this, base map for the instructor. Which is the final version of mine. You could also just call it base map final for skill development number 4. All right, that way, if I ever need to go back, I can always go back and have those layers available to me. So at this point in the process, I'm going to go ahead and say I've got all the information I need, go into my layout view, and now here comes the challenge, is how do we want to lay this out? If I roughly want an 11 by 17 when I'm done, do I want to go ahead and have this laid out portrait or landscape? I think in my case it's going to be probably landscape, although it's a circle so it doesn't really matter, it could be either one. I think I'm just going to go ahead and zoom as best I can around that. There may be some adjustments, like you notice that the width of my line here got really small. I want that buffer to be bigger. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut off this white space over here, so I'm actually going to shrink down the overall size of my window. Maybe go ahead and expand it out so I can really see all of those details. Right, I think that's looking pretty good at this point in time. So now what I've got is I've got my image and I've got space over here for I'm actually going to go ahead and cut the state line off, and that way we can probably see a little bit more of the Indianapolis region kind of sneaking into my map over there. It also removes kind of a hard edge that only exists really because I don't have data for Illinois. Anyway, so at this point in time what I can do is I can go ahead and insert my scale bar. Almost always use the same scale bar. Some of you might notice that something's wrong with it, like it's in meters and not in miles. You can always just go ahead and come in here and change that and adjust it to miles. But you can also just go ahead and downsize it. That's 10 miles. Drop it in about where I want it. Go ahead and insert my north arrow. Grab that as well. And drag my north arrow over here. All right. And then one thing that we didn't do last week is I can go ahead and insert a legend. Right? And so I can actually tell it what I want the legend to actually represent by going in and adding or removing. I'm going to assume that most people can pick up that rivers are blue, populated places, right? The shade state park boundary, the buffer, the forest cover. I'm going to assume that forest cover makes sense. County boundaries, I'm going to go ahead and drop those out. Highways, I'm going to do the same thing. Just go ahead and remove out some of these layers. At the end of the day, I want my legend to have trails, the populated places, the shade state park boundary, and you know what? I'm going to change my mind. I am going to go ahead and put the shades forest cover back in there, right? And then what it'll do is it'll go ahead and auto-generate a legend for me, and I can make some adjustments if I really want to, but generally I can just go ahead and click through and see now my purple lines are trails, my red areas are populated places, the shade state park boundary is on there. If I ever want to come in and change these up, meaning that the legend doesn't make sense, like shades buffer populated places, you just come over here in your table of contents and you change the label. And it's going to auto change your labels down here. And so you can go through and update all of these, but this way you have an automatically generated legend. You could, in theory, go ahead and insert a text box and do some other things here to finish out your layout. It's faster in Photoshop. That's why I'm generally going to tell you to go do that there. And I probably should be more accurate with that, which is towns within the buffer. right? Anyway, you get the point. This lays it all out. From this point in, you're going to go ahead and kick this out to Photoshop one layer at a time, just like we did last time. Here's one tip that I've got for you, is that my recommendation when it comes to taking labels out of Photoshop, or out to Photoshop from CAD, or not from CAD, from GIS. All right, so if I go ahead and just real quick zoom in on this, you're going to see that the labels are actually all well sized, but it's not a separate, the labels are not a separate layer from my town features. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to export the towns within my study area, right? Kick this layer out. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back in and I'm going to say label the features. And I'm going to say no color. Actually, I'm going to go one step further than that. I'm going to say no color on the line too. And then I'm going to export a layer that's just the labels themselves. That way I can go in, use the multiply tool in Photoshop and immediately just drop in my labels and have them as a separate layer. You could also use the magic wand, remove all the white space, and then you can actually add effects behind all of these. That's certainly a possibility as well. You can also then at that point in time go in and actually delete off some of these smaller towns and just have labels on the bigger communities within the study area. That's certainly an option as well. You could also, save a layer this way, go in and increase the font size so that you have the option in Photoshop. But to be honest with you, more often than not, tends to be a reference layer for me in Photoshop. And then I'll just use the text tools there to go ahead and retype the names of the towns that I want to highlight. That way I have all the controls of an actual Photoshop text layer, and I don't have to worry about trying to make some raster image of text work in Photoshop. So lots of different ways to wrap that up. I'm going to go ahead and leave this to you. Certainly the videos from the first GIS module that we did last week are definitely relevant to helping you turn this in. But what I expect you to turn in at the end of this assignment is a high quality base map containing all of this information about the 20-mile buffers surrounding your state park.